correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPG. We're going to have some fun today talking about some virtual tabletop stuff. But before we get into all of that, I want to take a minute to tell you about another podcast here on the D20 Radio Network. And this week we're going to highlight The Story Told, which is a long-running podcast focused on tabletop role-playing games. It's hosted by Logan and Griffin, and as of last I knew, they had a third co-host named Kim. That may or may not still be the case. I'm a little behind on my listening because, as you'll find with a lot of people who make podcasts, we sometimes don't get, stay all that up-to-date on our listening of them. But anyway, basically they do, last time I checked, they release episodes weekly, but they alternate between actual play episodes and talk episodes. And the talk episodes it's kind of a variety of stuff. Sometimes it'll be game reviews, sometimes it'll be interviews with creators, sometimes it'll be kind of more topical, like concept-related discussion. Actually, it's a very good show, very good insights, lots of interesting, thought-provoking stuff. Probably if they have a particular bend, it's a little more toward narrative games as opposed to more kind of tactical crunchy games. But yeah, so check out The Story Told. They also do some actual play stuff. Last I knew, they had a Promethean actual play going, and like I said, that kind of alternates weeks with their talk episodes. So check them out. Again, that's The Story Told. There'll be a link in the show notes, or you can find them on pretty much all the podcatcher places. So that's that. So this week, I'm actually joined by JJ from the RPG Sessions team to talk about, some VTTs and RPG sessions specifically. And so JJ, welcome to Me and Steve.
Thank you, Steve. Very, very happy to be here. Very honored. Glad to be here.
I don't know about the honored part because you have just walked into a world of madness, but so, I met you, a little over 2 years ago at Gamer Nation Con?
Yeah, just a little over 2 years, Gamer Nation Con, yep.
And actually, it's funny how much Gamer Nation Con and people therein kind of intertwine into everything, especially on the show lately. But I found out about RPG Sessions when GM Chris, during the same recording session where he kind of came and gave us an overview of the narrative dice, which is also when he asked us to join the D20 Radio Network, volunteered to come run a one-shot for us so we could actually experience it. And because, not giving anything away here, Chris lives in Texas, Steve and I live in Pennsylvania. It's kind of hard to sit at a table and roll dice when you live half a country apart.
Travel costs are a little high, huh?
For a one shot, just a little bit. So Chris was like, "Well, I'm going to try using this new thing I found," which was RPG Sessions. So prior to that, I had minimal experience with any VTT, and I briefly mentioned this before we started recording here, talking with you. But I have a very interesting relationship with technological things, in that I tend to get problems that no one else gets. And then people look at me funny and go, "But Steve, that doesn't happen." And I go, "Well, look, it happened to me. It doesn't help me that this doesn't happen to anyone else. I need to know how to fix it." Also, I just have this weird thing about sometimes I don't see the right spots to click in Windows. And so I say all this to kind of get around to, I'm not trying to take shots at Roll20 or any other VTT.
Sure, yeah.
I acknowledge that most of my issues are probably of my own making.
Well,
but I don't have them with RPG Sessions.
and we'll try to add some special Steve code in there for the next release, just so you can start experiencing it on RPG sessions too. How about that?
All right. But the thing I have enjoyed using RPG sessions is that it's a VTT, but it's much more of a online game facilitator than necessarily, and especially again, I haven't used sessions now in about a year and a half to 2 years because that was the last time I had an online game using the narrative dice going. But it's I would almost more classify it as an online game facilitator than a traditional VTT. Am I kind of
Yeah.
off base in that?
No, I think that's actually a really good way to look at it because, when we wanted to create something like this, we wanted to create something that allowed you to play the game and not get in the way. Not get in the way of just gaming, with your friends and with your group. And so we wanted to create something that was powerful, that had, the things that you needed to play the game, but at the same time, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles, just enough to where you can get what you need when you need it and just game. And
Mhm.
so that was kind of our outlook with it. And that we still try to focus on is just giving a tool that allow you to play the game without getting in your way.
No, and I in my from my experience, you've done exactly that. So, exactly, I mean, we've kind of gone around this maybe a little the wrong way. What exactly, for anyone who's not familiar with it, what is
Yeah.
RPG sessions?
Yeah. Yeah, no, okay. So that's a good intro here. So RPG Sessions is an online tool for the narrative dice game, narrative dice system, that's normally Star Wars or Genesis, by Edge Studio, previously Fantasy Flight Games. And what it basically is it's a dice roller, a character sheet, a game table that allows you to play your games online. It connects with Discord if you want, but yeah, it's just a specific VTT for the narrative dice system. Not necessarily made for other systems. We made it specifically for the narrative dice system.
Mhm. No, and that so I have also played narrative dice on the aforementioned Roll20.
Hmm.
And to me, it just doesn't work as smoothly. The dice
Yeah.
specifically. I'm not talking about, the character sheets, whatever. Again, I'm one of those people that oftentimes the first way I learn something in my brain becomes the way it's quote, air quotes here, supposed to be. And so literally, like I mentioned before, RPG sessions was how I was actually introduced to playing with the narrative dice.
Mm,
So
that's
I
cool.
think in my brain, RPG sessions is the standard. I'm not saying that anyone else needs to think about it that way, but to me
Yeah.
that is what is normal, and the other things are not normal.
Well, and I've had some games on Roll20 as well, and we're not necessarily trying to be a Roll20 killer because we just don't do everything that Roll20 can do, but just how a system or a tool like Roll20 is set up. It's meant to be very to touch a lot of games and to be able
Mhm.
to be configured into a way that you could use any game into it. And because of that, I think there's limitations when you have some specific things that like the narrative dice system, occupies. And so when you can make a VTT that can hone in on those specific needs and get rid of all the other extra fluff, then I think you've just got a better experience.
Oh, yeah, and I think too, and again, I haven't done any computer programming since 1998, which was a class in Turbo Pascal. But I would imagine, based on what I do know of programming, that actually the symbol canceling stuff is remarkably easy. Like that specific tiny element of the coding is actually probably really simple.
Yeah. Could be. And so that's and maybe that's another good thing. So I usually handle just the UI, the interface, the design. And
Okay.
then my buddies Dallas and Shane, they handle all the They make all my mock-ups and wireframes and sketches and, designs. They make it into an actual real thing. So they're the magicians.
Okay. No, I just, like I said, I don't know why, but that came to mind. But like, I feel like sessions too, like, and I'm sure you did this somewhat unintentionally, or if you didn't, you can say so. The layout and the kind of the graphic themes kind of remind me of the specifically more the Genesis graphic than the Star Wars, but they're still in the same kind of family. And so, like, it doesn't feel foreign as compared to looking at the printed out sheets you'll get out of the book or whatever. So like, it feels like much more to me like I'm playing with a physical sheet online that has a couple buttons I can click, as
Yeah.
opposed to like
Something that's been created to fit that system,
right. Well, but I guess,
Yeah.
as you said, because it was purpose created to play with the narrative dice system, you're much more able, probably. Again, you're the graphics person, but I would guess because you're going for one thing, you're much more able to purpose design it than if you're trying to make a Swiss Army knife that does all the things.
Yeah, and this is interesting. So it's kind of touching upon this, right? So the whole reason why we even created this is I was working at a place with Dallas, and I was running Star Wars games at lunchtime, and he was loving it, and I had this idea of, hey, maybe we should, try to play some more online sometime. So we got into some play by posts, and there weren't any dice roller apps that was really decent that you could play a play by post on back in the day. I think we used one called Orcus or something like that that I think is still might exist. But you would like plug in your dice, and then you could share the results of the roll. And I think we were using like the Google Plus forum community,
Hmm.
to do our play by posts. Anyways, we were like, wouldn't it be really cool if we did a dice roller where you could like actually like have some graphics and roll some dice? And Dallas was like, yeah, oh, we should totally do that. And so we started off just with that dice roller. And then we were like, oh, would it be cool if we could like add our character sheets? That way we could just have all the information there. And he was like, oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, let's do that. And so it just started to kind of evolve as we needed it to, until I started seeing some other VTTs that were trying to handle the narrative dice system, and I just was like, oh, it's just, the user interface might be a little clunky. It just doesn't feel intuitive. It's missing some really cool things that I think we could do. And so then we created a game table. And then Shane came along. I was working with him at another job, and he's like, "Oh, we need to connect this to Discord." It's like, "Oh, that's brilliant." And so we just kind of over time, just because of what we wanted, it just evolved into what it is today. Thinking along those lines of what do we want? What would make our games, better and easier to use?
But yeah, well, so to speak, and I say this a lot, especially lately on the podcast. I think the thing that sets kind of the smaller, more, if you want to call them indie games, apart from a lot of, be it, D&D or whatever, is that so many times, especially when you're dealing with a game that was, so to speak, one creator or a very small team, it is, here's our fun, won't you come share it? And it sounds like that's literally how RPG sessions came about.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when we started doing it and people were, and I think we launched it. Here's the other cool thing too. We launched it right before COVID, like a few
Mhm.
months before COVID. And that was, I mean, obviously COVID was horrible, and a lot of things were going on during that time, but for the gaming community, RPG sessions became like, oh, we can still game together even though we can't be together. And so when COVID hit, RPG sessions just took off because people could still access their games and play and character sheets, and so it was kind of fortuitous, but unplanned, I guess. We didn't release the COVID virus just to bump up our RPG sessions numbers. I promise.
Well, now, am I correct not that I've ever looked into this, but you guys are, like, basically completely supported by your Patreon, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because and we wanted to create something that was free that people could use, and we've tried to be aware of not infringing on any copyrights, but at the same time we wanted to just make it free and available anybody to use. We have a Patreon account that if people want to, they're welcome to support us. But yeah, this is just a labor of love for us. We do it in our spare time when we can.
Well, I know I've been a part of your Patreon, albeit at a rather low level, but for quite a while now, and I do know you don't paywall things per se. It's more like depending on your tier. Like I want to say Scout sound right is one of the names of your tiers. I know it's
Mhm.
probably like the base one, like
Yeah.
$2 a month or something.
Yeah, yeah.
I can upload up to I forget how many, like import I don't know how many like NPC templates from Ogdude or one of the other Star Wars. There are other sites that sessions links to that lets you import pre-generated NPCs or
Yeah.
whatever, and that is to a certain point restricted based on your Patreon tier. But I never had a problem running like a we'll call it a either short weekly or like a bi-monthly game of like, oh wait, oh crap, I'm out of. And let's be honest, even if I need to create them, it doesn't take very long, especially if I can have two tabs open and just start clicking between them
Right.
to build them. And the other thing I've noticed that you guys tend to do is that when you're working on new features, you'll kind of release the beta to your higher level Patreon tiers ahead of
Yeah.
time, which I mean, look, to me this makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we try to keep it to where anybody could log in and not feel like they're limited. We have some nice to have things that, does cost money to keep going and function, but you can create unlimited characters, unlimited adversaries, unlimited game tables, all that kind of stuff is there. Those nice to haves can be helpful,
Mhm.
but it doesn't limit you to where you can't play the game unless you have it.
Right.
And
And
so, yeah,
well, and I was going to say just to clarify what I was saying earlier,
yeah,
at least on my experience as a user, the limit is on the amount of NPCs or whatever I can import from another site. I can
right,
create as many as I want to, and
right,
you guys store them somewhere, which
yep,
I'm sure hosting costs money, storage requires hosting.
yeah.
It doesn't just fall out of the sky.
Right. And those tiers have, image uploads now to where you can upload, I think the Scout tier or something like that has like a gig of available space. You can upload images for your characters. And again, that just, costs some money, monthly fees and stuff, but up to the highest tier, which I think gives you like 10 gigs of space, that you can, if you're just a power user and love creating and have your own images and you just are finding those Will Nunes, artwork that you're just loving and you've got them all saved and you're putting them on your characters, then you'll have the space. But not that it limits it, you can still find URLs and use that as your image. So we've tried to make it to where it's like if you really want to power use, we're given those options. It just costs money, and since we're trying to do it for free, we've got to somehow pay the bills.
Right. Like you could. So I actually have a question
Yeah,
regarding like because I know you have since I've used it introduced some map tools and some stuff like that.
yeah,
How does that work in terms of and we'll tie this into the whole Patreon thing because like I know initially anyway when you rolled out the maps it was only for certain Patreon tiers.
hmm
Does that is that works then based on the owner, the GM of the game, and they're like, if I'm a whatever tier patron, all my players don't have to be that level patron to use the maps that I can put up, correct?
correct. Yeah, yeah. So and we used to have we tried out maps with our highest tier patrons for a bit, and I think things were going really well, and it was holding stably, enough to where we could say, okay, let's drop it down to another tier. Our top tiers, they have stuff called table tokens, where you can apply a table token to one of your game tables, and anybody in that game table has access to all the features that you have as a higher paying patron.
Hmm.
So maps are available for that game, and once if you've done with a game, you can move that table token to another game. And so
Hmm.
yeah, it's just a way that we try to say, okay, you're supporting us here, but with this, you'll be able to get everybody in your game also access to it.
Hmm. Well, again, to me, that makes sense. Like, what good does it do if the GM is the only one that has the
Right.
map?
Yeah. Yep.
And in fairness to, like, I'm a weird. I actually, in most cases, often prefer to play more theater of the mind.
Yeah. Yep.
And again, I think it's because, like I mentioned before, right? Like the way in again, this is a completely in my head thing, but the way I learn things is in my brain computes that as the way they're supposed to be. At least that's my frame of reference. And because I got into gaming as a broke college student who borrowed books and wrote character sheets on notebook paper, now, I freely admit I long since much prefer to have an actual printed character sheet, but like
Yes.
theater of the mind gaming to me was that's how you did it, and minis were a cool thing to use, maybe if you had them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
But I
I Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I think a lot of people newer to the hobby that I've met in recent years are a little, I don't know, shocked is the right word, but like, what do you mean you don't have to have a little piece to move around? I'm like, well, it's just not how it works in my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the narrative dice system, that was the first RPG system I was ever introduced to,
Hmm.
and it was right after Fantasy Flight released, Edge of the Empire, and so, to me, that was my first intro into it, and I loved I enjoy storytelling. I there's a crunch that I like too, but I really love that narrative aspect of things, and so Theater of Their Mind, we created RPG sessions at first with that in mind, saying, well, this is a more theater of the mind kind of a game. You don't need maps, which was one of the things that you would see on Foundry or Roll20 or some of the other ones where there's this huge center area that's supposed to be for a map. It's like, well, you don't really need a map for narrative dice system because it can be function as a theater of the mind game. And so to me, whenever I need a map or something like that, I usually kind of go back to, GM Hooley's zones kind of idea that I
Hmm.
really like. And so even with like our maps that we have now available, you could keep it that simple. You just put out a grid. You got some tools where you can draw a little bit and just be like, you're here, and over here's the door. Oh, it's 3 zones away. It's medium distance or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Medium range. But I do like the idea of that theater of the mind and how it opens up to where if you have a map and you're looking at a room and you see a desk and a chair and then a library, books over here, and suddenly your mind is really set into what's in that room. With theater of the mind and those destiny tokens and story points, anything could be in that room. It's up to your imagination. You could flip one to say, hey, does this place have a fireplace, coals, and I don't know, you could just kind of create whatever you wanted.
So I'm going to go off on a tangent, but that's okay because
Sweet.
that's what we do here.
Tangents are good, yeah.
You have hit on something and I've said this before, but I sometimes actually find using maps restrictive. And that's because of what you were just saying, that subconsciously, when you see a map, the things that are printed on the map are there. The things represented on the map, be it by tokens or whatever, are there. And that is all that is there. Where for me, theater of the mind is a bit richer in that you describe, oh, it's this guy's study, and so there's a desk and there's bookshelves and a bookcase, and in my mind, okay, maybe there's a fireplace, or I might not instantly envision a fireplace, but somebody else at the table says, "Oh, is there like a fireplace?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, that completely fits." Like, I think it allows. How do I want to say it? The absence of presented detail allows the imagined detail to be richer.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. That seems counterintuitive, but I think it's because you're filling in your blanks, your mental image is richer than I'm putting the pieces I see together.
Yeah.
I don't know if that.
Oh yeah. And I think another aspect to it is strategy. Strategic role playing games. Like for example, I just started playing a game called Lancer,
Hmm.
which is very tactical when you have your mechs, on a grid. Fun game, and minis and maps are cool. I think nobody's gonna ever say they're not cool, but they're fun. But because the nature of the game is a little bit more strategic, a little bit more tactical, it helps to say, here's this grid. My ability allows me X number of hexes to do this or that or the other thing. Whereas with narrative dice and the theater of the mind, not that you can't be strategic, but it doesn't have to be tactical because you're focusing more on what's going to be a good scene, what's going to be a cool moment,
Hmm.
what makes sense, in our narrative to make something that's going to make everybody go like that was awesome, even
Right.
though we didn't have a map and tokens and figurines and minis and stuff like that.
Right. Now, and now I actually have a question, if you don't mind. I've heard a lot about Lancer. I actually have somewhere in my giant file of PDFs, I have the free PDFs they distributed. My understanding with Lancer is there actually almost two mechanical systems in that game. One for combat that is much more tactical, and your general role play system that is much less so. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that is. Yep. Yeah. When you're in your mech, very tactical, very strategic. There's, obviously a role playing you can do, but it's a it's more on the side of a tactical war game. When you're out of your mech, just as a character, much more, you don't have the stats that you would think you would have as just a character in another role playing game. You
Mhm.
have, abilities or talents or things that you can kind of work your way into. But it's a lot more loose, a lot more narrative, a little bit more open, interpretive
Mhm.
character. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, like I said, that's
I
one of
mean,
those. Yeah, go ahead.
and you have to think. I mean, when you're playing a mech game like that, you're doing probably most of the gaming in the mech. Obviously, so because that's
Well, maybe, right? Like, it kinda
maybe,
depends.
yeah, yeah,
Like, I think if you have big stompy robots, you want to play with the big stompy robots.
exactly, right.
But at the same point, like, and I think this is, I find it fascinating, and at some point, I would love to have a kind of a longer conversation with you as someone, because you came into role playing with the narrative dice system, was your introduction. And for me, when I got exposed to that system, got to play it, I like it. I am very much, though, not a one system person. I I like a lot of different games, and sometimes for different reasons. But the one thing I kind of found, and I'd be curious if for you maybe it almost worked the reverse of this. The biggest hurdle I had with the narrative dice system was that you almost think it reverse of a quote unquote traditional game, in that the narrative dice system wants to encourage you to go, what is it you want to do? And then we figure out how to roll it, where more often in traditional games it's, I want to roll skill X, what does it do?
Mhm.
And did you have kind of the inverse of that circumstance happen, coming from narrative dice to other games?
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that too, because right now I'm playing with Nate at Tabletop Empire for his actual play, along with Noah and Joe and Lacey. Fun time, super good group.
Hmm.
But there's at very first, I think it was Joe. There was a few times where he would say, in the game, like, I want to roll stealth, and he was fairly new to the narrative dice system, right? And
Hmm.
so Nate would be like, "Well, what is it you're wanting to do?" you know? And so after Joe would describe it, he's like, okay, yeah, go ahead and roll a stealth. And so it's interesting how there's that mindset, where I came into it saying, okay, I want to, jump on these crates, crawl up to the very top, get a good lookout, and then be ready to pounce on anything that comes below. And the GM would then say, okay, why don't you do this, do that? Maybe you can roll this, maybe you don't need to. Whereas on the other side, you think more of that skill first. You say,
Mhm.
okay, I want to roll athletics. You roll it. Okay, then it looks like I climb up these crates. Okay, now I want to roll a stealth. Okay, now I'm gonna hide in the shadows up here. It's just a different way of thinking, how you approach kind of that scene. And I think with the narrative dice, to me at least, it's fun because you get to kind of build that scene in that kind of visual sense first, rather than letting the dice roll or GM telling you what you can do. The
Mhm.
players have just as big of a part in it to help describe the scene and the story as the GM does.
Mhm. Well, and I think to tie this into sessions, right? The way you guys have built sessions, it very much facilitates you saying what you want to do, the GM going, "Okay," and then, "Okay, scroll to that the dice roller to that skill, click it, you know, add your difficulty, roll."
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that I love about sessions is, and again, I don't think we need to get into the nitty-gritty of how your dice pool gets built for the narrative dice because that's a whole nother topic kind of in a way.
Mhm.
But what sessions does that makes this very easy is the player side of the pool is just a quick click. The
Yeah.
difficulty
Yep.
side is, what's my difficulty? It's two purples and a red. So you go to the little bar, you click the purple dice twice, the red dice once. Any setback, boost, what? No. Oh, okay. Roll. That's it.
Yeah.
And then now I do know, and I remember fiddling with it a little bit, although for for me as a GM, I tend to more just tell people their difficulty as opposed to using the targeting systems
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
that are built into sessions, just because I don't know if it's how my brain processes things. So like it does, I know sessions does calculate like if something has adversary 2, it automatically does the upgrades to your combat checks or whatever. But like you don't have to use that, which I think is
Right.
also, it's something I like in that it lets me understand the system the way I do, or it'll figure it out for me too.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. And that's a appreciate that comment because we try to make it to where it's powerful enough to be whatever you need it to be. And if you want to use the combat builder, you select your weapon, choose your target, choose your range, say build the pool, and it takes into account adversary and defense and all that kind of stuff. And then when you roll it, it'll say, okay, here's your base damage, here's the damage on top of that, here's your crit if you get it. And you can definitely go that whole route. Or you can just be like, I just want to pull up the dice roller and plug in the dice and hit roll, and you'll get the same results, or maybe not the same results, obviously, but you'll get the results that you need. So hopefully, yeah, it's we allow however you want to play. Hopefully, it's got a way to do that.
Well, yeah, and I like that in a sense, right? Like I can play sessions how I know how to play narrative dice. I don't have to do it the way you coded it to work, which I
Yeah.
much more got that sense, the experience I had playing narrative dice on roll 20 is that I have to play it, use the dice roller their way, where yours lets me use it either way.
And since you've played it, we might have done a few updates to it that that we hoped were kind of like that improvement aspect, trying to make it a little bit better. Because at first we had our game table, we were trying to pull in aspects of character sheets into the game table that you could access, until we were like, why don't we just have the character sheet in the game table? Ooh, how do we make that look then? And so now we have the full character sheet in the game table, like you said, where you can just click on a skill, you can click on a weapon, and it brings up all those dice.
Mhm.
So hopefully we still are just trying to make it as user friendly, as easy to use. And there were some people, I think, after we did this update, because our dice roller is kind of off to the side now, and people found it kind of cumbersome to have to click on the button to open up the dice roller and then clicking on the dice. We're like, well, you can do it that way, but we've also added the ability to where you can just click on a skill and it'll add the dice. So we've tried to improve, again, just trying to make it to where you can play your game, get the VTT out of the way, just play the game and have a good time.
JJ, are you trying to tell me that the internet can't agree on what's the easiest way to do something?
I know, it's crazy, huh? It's wild.
Oh man. No, but like I just want to say, like, honestly, just a huge thank you to you and the rest of the guys that made it, because it really, for me, is, eh, I've said it before and I think you kind of said it today. For me, it is a online tool that lets me play the game but gets out of the way when I don't need it.
Yeah.
And while I have had experiences like that with Roll20, for me, that has been much more dependent on the GM having a good handle on the system and how the character sheet in Roll20 works for it to flow that smoothly, where Sessions to me feels much more like an online adaptation of a physical table. I don't know if
Yeah.
that translates into words well, but
Yeah.
like,
No, I appreciate that, yeah. And I remember, I used to not listen to the Order 66 podcast a lot,
right,
and,
none of us ever did.
nope, none of us ever did. And I remember, I think there was one time when they were going through some of their, finds of the week or something like that, and I think it was GM Dave had brought up that he had found RPG Sessions when it was just like the dice roller, and did a little plug for it, and, I was in the car driving to work and flipping out thinking, "Oh, they just mentioned RPG Sessions." I was excited. So we've had just, Drain Smiths, Scott from the Genesis community and all the people in the Star Wars role playing community. They've just been so supportive of RPG Sessions that we want to thank them a lot for enjoying it, and we're glad that people are just enjoying it. And it's not for everybody. Maybe people just don't, just can't get into RPG Sessions and they love Roll20 or Foundry. That's great. That's totally fine. But we're just always tickled, when people have found fun games while they use it, and yeah, it just makes us happy that people are enjoying it.
Well, like I said, I think the fact that it's purpose built probably just makes it do the thing it does better. Like I've said this many times. Okay, I'm a bit of a tool junkie as a real life person. I have a couple Leatherman multi tools. They are wonderful pieces of engineering. They're well made, but given if I'm out in the garage tinkering with things, I will go to the toolbox and get a screwdriver, not open up the bit on the Leatherman, because as a screwdriver, my screwdriver is a little bit more functional than the bit on my Leatherman. That's not
Yeah.
saying that the bit on my Leatherman, that there's anything wrong with it, but that the purpose-built thing does the purpose it's built for better.
Yeah.
Where the
Yeah,
Leatherman
that's a
is
great
great
analogy. Yeah.
is if I want to, and actually I do this, I keep a Leatherman in the console or the glove box of like my car so that I have a little bit of everything, because I'm not going to carry, my giant toolbox in the back of my 20-year-old Honda Civic,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
because I'd be dragging the bumper. And I say that in the sense that to a certain point, you have made the narrative dice screwdriver not the any game system Leatherman, and
Right.
that's not knocking. Like I said, I'm not
Yeah.
knocking a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife,
Right.
but the thing that is made to do the thing is going to be better at the thing. It's just not going to be as useful. If I need a wrench, a pair of pliers, my screwdriver doesn't help me. My Leatherman
Mhm.
can do both.
Yeah. And early on, I was getting into the age, fantasy age,
Mhm.
system that I've played too, and I was talking with the guys. It's like, oh, we should see if we could add this to RPG sessions, and so we started. I started doing some designs for it, and after a while, we were just like, you know what? We have so many things that we still want to do for the narrative dice system and that tool. Trying to introduce a whole new system, it just wasn't going to work.
Hmm.
And so we kind of just doubled down and said, let's just make this the best tool we can for the narrative dice system. Whether you're playing Star Wars or Genesis, or we just want to make this just the best that it can for it. And ever
Hmm.
since then, we've tried to focus on just that.
I see. I did actually want to ask you about that. And it's
Mhm.
ironic that you mention the age system because that is one of the systems I've wanted to fiddle with and kind of wished, boy, it would be nice if sessions or something like sessions existed because it's just different enough that your generic dice roller apps don't really do it justice because you need that distinct die for your
Yeah,
stunt die. So your generic roll 3d6 dice roller app doesn't really do that.
yeah,
And so I was curious, or the other one that I've been for a long time, and this again goes to my issues with technological things, is Savage Worlds. Like, I I so badly want to do some stuff with Savage Worlds and Savage Rifts in particular because Rifts and I have a history. Um, but like the idea of learning Savage Worlds and learning how to GM Savage Worlds on Roll20 together is very daunting to me.
mm,
And I can honestly say that the way Sessions is built, that hurdle wasn't there in terms of having to learn how to operate the VTT and the die. Like learning how to operate the VTT was very, very simple and intuitive. And I'm terrified of trying to learn how to operate Roll20 or Foundry to do Savage Worlds while I'm also trying to get my head around
yeah,
exactly the nuances of the system.
yeah,
And I feel like you guys should be complimented for the fact that your VTT or your tool or whatever you want to call it kind of does the things it needs to do without you having to know how to manipulate the computer to do it.
yeah, yeah. We hope that's the case. We want it to be easy to just jump on and use. And obviously, the more features we give it, it's just one of those things where the more features you give it, the more complex it starts to become. And we've been working on some other features in the background that we want to release,
Mhm.
but getting it to where we can still keep it to where it's easy to use. That's always the challenge of user interface design. How do
Mhm.
you add more features without making it too complex? And there were times where I've actually brought iPads to game conventions, and there's been a few times where I've brought iPads with all the characters in the one shot in a game table and tried to run it at cons, trying to show people RPG sessions.
Mhm.
And some people get it and are just jump in and love it, and like how it calculates the dice for you, because I know that's a big roadblock for some people, is the narrative dice, and the symbols. But then there's others that still struggle with it. And again, it could just be that the system itself isn't quite for them, but they just for some reason can't quite wrap their heads around it. So
Mhm.
we try. Obviously, won't be that way for every single person, but we definitely give it a good shot.
Well, I look, I love RPG sessions. I'm just gonna say it
Oh,
straight up.
thank you.
I mean,
Oh, thank you.
eh, you know, and look, anyone who's listened to the show, I mean, we don't spend a ton of time talking about any specific system, but I can unreservedly say that for narrative dice games, RPG sessions is my online go-to.
Oh, that's nice of you to say.
So, what else do you have going on? I do know, and I probably should have mentioned this before you did, but you are part of Nate at Tabletop Empire's Dark Underworld actual play crew, which is, by the way, fabulous.
Oh,
Lord
yeah,
Keenan of
thank you.
Spaghetti is wonderful.
That was awesome. Yeah, we have a good time. It's they they're all friends, and as RPG sessions, as we've been kind of sponsoring and powering the actual play, and Nate had mentioned if that he was looking for one more person, and I'm like, me maybe is that okay? And they've welcomed me and been really really nice, and so it's been a lot of fun.
So do you have anything else you would like to plug or anything like that? Like I obviously RPG sessions was rpgsessions.com.
Yep, rpgsessions.com. It's a free account you can, create and log in. And yeah, I guess the only other thing that I would plug is if you're interested in seeing some of, because, I'm a designer, I'm an illustrator. Joras_ID is my Instagram account. Feel free to check me out there. Usually, when October comes around, I'm filling it with Inktober sketches, which is always a fun thing. But
Mhm.
uh, yeah, other than that, rpgsessions.com.
All
You don't have
right.
an account, get a free one and have some fun.
Oh, one kind of technical nerdy question, just because
Yeah.
I don't even know what it is, but I do know there is one talent hidden in one of the Star Wars books somewhere that lets you turn a die in a roll to an adjacent face.
Yes.
Do you guys have the functionality to do that or not? I'm just asking because I'm being nerdy. It like,
Yeah. No, that is a great question, and it's been asked of us so much that I think it still is in our frequently asked questions. Um, on the game table itself, we don't have a way to take a dice and change it to another one, and the talent is escaping me what it's called, but it's funny that you asked that because we get that one asked a lot. I do believe though we created on Discord a way to do that. So if you're playing a game on Discord and you roll dice and you get a result, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that we have a way now where you can
Mhm.
access that dice and say, I want this side. You can select that side. So yeah, good question.
I look, and here's the funny part about this, and I will fully acknowledge that I'm doing exactly this. I think it is very much a gamer thing to take this one little piece of minutia, this extreme edge case, and fixate on, well, it can't be
Oh,
good enough because it won't handle this one thing that. Look, you've been playing the narrative dice Star Wars since it launched. What's now what 12, 13 years ago.
mhm.
You don't remember what it's called. I know it exists. I don't know what it's called. I probably if we called GM Chris or GM Hooley or GM Phil, they would probably know what it is.
Mhm.
But I'm going to say this, and I love Chris, Hooley, and Phil. They're giant Star Wars RPG nerds.
Oh yeah.
Like they are like orders of magnitude more nerdy about that
Oh yeah.
than even my RPG obsessed person is. And so like I think to a certain point maybe sometimes we could just get over ourselves for this minutia because let's be honest, most of us or let's put it this way, if you're in an online Star Wars RPG and no one participating in that game has the physical dice to pull one out and look at it and go, well, the sides adjacent to what you rolled are. You're that is an even more extreme edge case than the
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
talent coming up.
Oh yeah. But it totally has. That's a popular question that we get. Yep. And
Well, but
yeah.
so that actually though, again, tangents because that's what we do here.
That's
I
right.
remember when we interviewed Jay Little and he was talking about there's some sort of famous thing in the Warhammer 3rd edition design with spell casting where if the exact wrong set of things happens, your spellcaster goes boom and so does everything within like half a mile.
Oh wow.
I mean, I could be exaggerating.
Mhm.
And but I specifically remember him saying in the interview that they actually recognized that that was a possibility in the design phase, but went, yeah, but it's an extreme edge case.
Will it actually ever happen?
And he said the thing that kind of came out and they kind of realized after the fact, once it was released and out in the wild, was that, yes, that is an extreme edge case, but your sample size when you release it into the wild and everyone is playing it is so large that those edge cases happen. And because it is a memorable boom, it becomes this fact because it does happen. And your sample size just is, even though Warhammer Third Edition was probably not an extremely popular game, but the sample size is still orders of magnitude larger than anything you can do in playtest. That
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Good point. Yep.
All right. Well, that being said, everybody go check out RPG Sessions. But it's time for us to play Game of the Week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
Would you like me to go first, or would you like to go first, JJ?
Oh, you go first. I think I've got mine, but you go for it.
All right. Well, so my Game of the Week pick this week, and I literally found this morning. And this is one of those things, I obviously found it this morning, so I haven't actually bought it, read it, anything like that. But the topic of this, and ironically, this strangely has a weird dovetail into the fact that we spent today talking about VTTs. It's a game called, and I'll post a link to this now that I remembered I was going to do this, in the Green Room channel, which is directly above the channel we're chatting in. It's a game called Machine Gods of the Noxian Empire. So this is an OSR game, so I'm guessing, kind of basic old school D&D-esque rules, but it is a dark fantasy / science fiction tabletop role-playing game set in a post-apocalyptic world. Okay, we've all heard that description before, right? We've heard that many, many times. Here's where it gets kind of fun. In this world, humanity's technological golden age has ended in a catastrophe. In the aftermath, AI systems evolved into machine gods, and human society has rebuilt itself into a feudal structure with people interpreting advanced technology through a mystical lens. Focused on a specific region known as the Noxian Expanse, in this wasteland, ancient ruins, old city-states, blah, blah, blah. But I think the thing about this that kind of caught me, and it's somewhere in the description here, is this very much plays on the idea that magic is just technology we don't understand. And I've heard that said so many times. I don't know why anyone hasn't, or I haven't found a game, I guess is the better way to say it, why I haven't found a game that is built on that premise.
Cool.
I mean, PDF is $15. It's about 110 pages, so not the cheapest, but not, terrible,
It's
right?
doable.
I mean, I've spent
It's
$15 on worse.
Yeah.
But I also like this, even if you just take this and take the setting concepts and move it to Genesis if you want to. Or, quite frankly, this would be an amazing, totally thematic, some planet your ship crashes onto in Star Wars thing. Like, that would be, how many times did they do kind of, I want to say goofy, but like we've seen that in how many episodes of, be it Rebels or Clone Wars, or like Star Wars is so cool about doing those kind of weirdly themed locations. Why couldn't you do that with this?
Oh yeah. That reminds me of, I think it's in the Nexus of Power source book. There's a planet called Week, I believe it is, that have magic users there that are, force users, but they interpret the force in some of the kind of magical, mystical way. And sometimes they'll even be like, I use, the force through vials of colored sand, and that's how it manifests or whatever. So totally reminded me of that. Is if your players ever crash landed on Week, they would find what seems to be this medieval type of community focused on the force in this magical sense. But maybe it's not, because you were also talking about the force, or sorry, magic is just a technology we don't understand. So maybe it's not quite there, but
No, but like, I think playing on that thought, right? Like, that's the thing. It's not, I don't know, is it? If we don't understand it, how can we say it isn't?
yeah, yeah,
Like,
that's cool. No, that's fun.
yeah, like, I don't know. I think it's, and this is, again, like, it fully claims to be, an OSR style thing. Literally says, in the description on drive through, you can go through and do your background and motivations, by making them up. Or if, I love this, it says, too lazy to think of a proper background and motivation? Roll on the many tables the book includes and learn who your character is. So it's got
Always
everything.
fun. Yeah, that's always
And
fun.
that is a very OSR mentality, right? The random tables and whatnot. But the other thing, and I touched on this on the last episode when we talked with Adam from Bright Sun about his table generator books. Tables, you can roll on them, or sometimes you can just look at them and go, "Oh, wait!" And it just that entry on the table, you see it, and that sends you off down this track of, then I can do this and this and this and this. You didn't roll a
Oh,
damn
totally.
thing, but
Yeah.
that one entry on the table spurred you into this whole creative string.
Yep. Yep. So true.
So that's going to be my game of the week this week is Machine Gods of the Noxian Empire.
Nice. All right. Well, should I share mine?
Absolutely.
So last week was free RPG day, and me and some buddies went to our local game store and picked up a few adventures and stuff that were really fun. While I was there, though, I've had this bookmarked on my wish list on Drive Through RPG, I think it was. Game called Scum and Villainy. It's a Forged in the Dark, and it's been out for I think some years now.
Yeah.
But I saw it there, as the book. I was like, well, I've got to get this. I've wanted to look into this. I feel kind of bad because I feel like I'm cheating on, the narrative dice system whenever I pick another Star Wars esque type game to play and to try. But so I've been looking at that one for a bit. I have never played or tried the Blades in the Dark, Forged in the Dark, rule set. But it was fascinating as I was learning about it, and I think it taps into that narrative aspect that I enjoy in games. I love the narrative aspect, and especially knowing that you could come into a game like Blades in the Dark or Scum and Villainy and not have any prep. A GM could come into it and not have any prep, maybe a little bit, but the game unfolds through the rolls because as you roll, they have each roll has a condition and an effect, and you can assign depending on the situation, and that could affect the next roll. It could either heighten things or lessen things. So I loved the idea of how these dice rolls help form the story, which is kind of what we look at the narrative dice system. It's supposed to do that as well to some degree. But anyway, so I've been really enjoying learning and reading about Scum and Villainy, which is a total start. You could it's a bunch of smugglers, people that are kind of on the fringes in space that are trying to do their own thing, take jobs. I think of Star Wars, I think of like Firefly. I think this is a game that works really well if you've got a crew of people that you just want to say, you guys are just trying to survive in this underworld and taking on jobs and trying to get by in life.
Well, right, but I mean, like, look, the title is obviously goes back to the Ben
Yeah,
Kenobi line,
right.
about the Mos Eisley Cantina.
I mean, there's mystics, which are force users. They have light swords, which are lightsabers. So it's very Star Wars
It's
esque.
got the serial
Yeah,
numbers filed off.
yeah,
But
exactly.
like you said though, okay, so it's but it enables more of a, if you want to take it in a more Firefly direction, or whatever else, right? It is because if you wanted to play Firefly in Star Wars, you certainly could. But at the same point, in the back of your mind, you're still playing Star Wars. Or maybe if
Yeah.
you're not using the Star Wars RPG, your brain doesn't fully think Star Wars.
Hmm.
And does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
if I sit down with the Star Wars dice and we're playing in a space setting with mystical stuff, my brain says Star Wars, not
Hmm.
the world the GM has said we're playing in.
Yeah. Yep.
Kind of like we talked about the maps, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm seeing Star Wars map, I think Star Wars, not the world of Gamma 37.
Yep. Yeah. No, totally true. And I mean, it's obviously geared towards that, but it's not a doesn't have Star Wars in it anywhere. Even though, like you said, it's that serial number with the numbers kind of filed off. But it's interesting though. As I've been learning about it, it's not one that if you like crunchy kind of games, tactical kind of games, it's it's not it's not necessarily made if you or I guess I should say that if you really like combat, you may not really get the enjoyment from it from other games because you could have a single roll and the story unfolds and you could take out three people in one roll that would normally have taken you an hour to game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and again, not that that's good or bad. It's just there are things that are different and unique about the system that I just think are interesting. I'd love to try it sometime and just wrap my head around it, see what it's like because I enjoyed trying other games and stuff. But
Oh yeah.
um, anyways, yeah, it's a looks like it's a fun one. It's a well made book, beautifully well made book. I think it's got like over 300 pages in it, so it's a hefty little book.
Well, those are.
Um,
I don't have it handy, but most of those Forged in the Dark games come in like the digest size, right? Like I know I have
right.
Band
Yeah.
of Blades has been sitting around here, and it's like that 8x5 or whatever, so 6x9, like slightly smaller, but like more normal book sized. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah, totally. I just dropped it.
uh, well, now you don't have to be worried about dropping it.
That's right. But yeah, it's fun. I'll have to try it sometime and see what it's like.
Cool. Yeah, that's been one that I've been curious about for a bit, actually. Just again with the stack of stuff I already own, that
Yeah. Ah.
it's the curse of doing this game of the week bit is I keep finding stuff and going, oh, I really want that.
Oh, so many games. I've got so many games on my shelf here that looked cool, and I usually try to run them at conventions because it's like I can't find the people local to play it, so I'll make other people play it, I guess.
Mhm. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to come talk with us.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for making a product that I enjoy using, and tell the rest of the team thank you as well. um,
I will do that.
and so, yeah, I mean, I guess, people go check out RPG Sessions if you're looking for an online tool to play either, narrative dice, be it Star Wars or Genesis or whatever. For me, it's very intuitive to learn and use. And like, yeah, just check it out. Like he said, how
Yeah.
many times today? It's free to use.
Yeah.
So it literally cost you your time of going to try it out. That's it.
Yep.
And if you think it's worth it, you can support them on Patreon and help them, feel like someone appreciates them.
We get a lot of that already, but yep. No, appreciate it. Thank you.
All that being said, I mean, obviously, check them out. As far as us with the podcast, all our contact information is down in the show notes. You can email us. You can come find us on our Discord. We also do the Patreon thing. If you get enough enjoyment out of the show that you want to kick us a couple bucks, we greatly appreciate it. There's links to our social media that I am horrible at posting anything on. But if you want to follow us, it'd be cool. Honestly, the bigger thing, tell your friends about the show if you like it, or leave a rating on whatever service you use to listen to us. Been saying this a little bit recently because we just recently started sending the podcast feed over to YouTube. If that works easier for anyone to listen to or whatever, it is literally just the audio feeds, the same as you get on the podcatchers, but it is on YouTube. It's at Me and Steve RPG, I think is the tag. Again, there's links for it in the show notes if you need to find it. I think if you search Me and Steve Talk RPGs, there's only about 3 or 4 things that come up on YouTube that aren't us. So, that's that. Yeah, aside from that, thank you again, JJ.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think with that, just want to remind everyone to be kind to each other and get out there and play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast, on Discord at Me and Steve RPGs, and as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.